Okay, we're here today with Dan Zeman. Dan is an exercise physiologist. He's recently written a book, You're Too Old to Die Young. He's got a background working with a number of pro athletes, which I think is really interesting. And his work, and particularly his book, is really targeted at men. So lots to talk about here. Dan, thanks so much for joining us today.
Oh, it's a pleasure. You know, I've followed you on LinkedIn and I reached out to you only because I think one of the things I said, I think you and I could probably finish each other's sentences, which is what I thought was kind of interesting. And maybe it's because we're both losing our hair and old, but I think there's a part of your brain that I identify with. So I'm happy to help you out. And hopefully there's enough men our age who figure out that they are too old to die young and that the next 25 years of their life, they do have to modify things or their quality of life is not going to be what they thought.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and one of the things for our listeners too is what really flagged me was there are not a lot of people like you out there that like me are really looking at what are the early points of beginning the aging trajectory, where I kind of look at it around, in our 40s or certainly by age 50, where we need to be more conscious of it than we typically are. The world surrounds us with people when we fall, but
Right.
who's getting us on the right trajectory early enough where
Right.
we can get a much longer flight path and get certainly a lot better years out of it. So of people out there are not a lot of you. So I'm really glad we connected.
Let me see if I can play that part for my wife again. I'll just edit that piece out and say, not a lot of it. She goes, well, I knew you were one of a kind. I told you what kind you were. So sorry for the digression there. But yes, it is, to me, it's kind of sad actually, because I think for those of us who've been around, who have started, I started with cardiacs. You always had to ask, what's the outcome? The people who said, I need to do something, but we never tried to sell them tennis shoes. We never tried to sell them Lululemon pants, or we tried to give them a quality of life. We tried to give them some sort of a training effect. And, at some point you got to ask yourself, when are you wasting their time? And, just because we can make them sweat doesn't mean that they get a return on those minutes. And I think so for me, one of the things what you mentioned, the pro athletes, I was fortunate when the Minneapolis Sports Medicine Center opened that they brought me in. So I was with the Timberwolves for 19 years, the NBA team, the Vikings, but the individual sports came in. So I was very blessed when Lamont called me. Greg Lamont, a 3-time Tour de France winner, and to do his stuff from '89, and when he won the tour, which really put cycling on the map in the United States. But you see all the pro athletes, they turn 32, 33 years old, and you see this huge drop off, and they just aren't the athlete they were. And I look at this going, well, what do they do? So biology comes in and says you can't defeat time, and yet you see these 50-year-old or 45-year-old guys screaming at the TV when they see a 28-year-old athlete who looks like, that guy's too old. What's he doing out there? He should retire. Come on, he can barely run. And I'm going, and you can? So you have to ask yourself, why is it a 45 to 50-year-old guy preaches to the 25 or 28-year-old or 30-year-old pro athlete and says, those guys are overrated, they can't even play anymore. And they go, so no, they atrophy and can't win. And yet I'm still trying to think that my biology is different if I just tried harder. So it was always ironic to me that these 45-year-olds and over never realized their biology would limit them at some point. And they have to start looking at what else is going to atrophy, whether it's their brain, their social, their cognitive, their agility, their coordination. And all those pieces just seemed obvious to me. And then again, when I started looking at a lot of the guys who retired at 65 or 60 years old, they kept saying, who am I going to be now? What do I do? How do I stay engaged? And so the retirement of the pro athlete, retirement of the 65-year-old, and then the male in me kept saying, are they just alpha males trying to figure out who they want to be? And why can't they just be average anymore? And so those kind of pushed me to write the book. And so I guess that may make me an anomaly only because I've seen so many pros and I've seen so many cardiacs. I've seen a wide spectrum of levels of fitness. But right now, when I start asking people ask me about exercise program, if they're over 45, I look at it, do I give them a return on their minutes? And if I don't, I'm not going to take that minute away from them. They'd be better off spending it with their grandkid or their wife. Sitting in the basement on a treadmill doesn't give them any quality of life.
Yeah, one of the areas I wanted to ask you about as well was when we look at athletes when they're coming up to retirement and after they retire, that's really a chance to study a group much earlier than the rest of us in the what we can call
Right.
more the typical careers are going to experience.
Right.
You've, I'm sure, learned some things watching a lot of these guys over the years.
Yeah, and I think Le Mans was the easiest because it was an N of one, but also he was so fit. And I got to spend a lot of time with him, and we tested him every 2 weeks. He would come in, and we put a mask on him, and we measured his oxygen consumption. But more so, we'd measure his CO2 production, which for all the nerds out there who are struggling with this word mitochondria, or why don't we burn fat anymore? There's this notion of overtraining that happens with athletes. We've always seen it. And if you're around pro athletes, I mean, best man at my wedding's wife was a 5-time Olympian track and field runner, a woman, Francie LaRue. And he said pre-games or pre-trials, Francie was not the person you wanted to be in the same room with, because they have to peak for these events. And that doesn't make them friendly to be around because they are just so on the edge. And so what happens to them is their mood states change, their sleep habits change, they get agitated, but they have to be that way to peak. And the flip side of that is easy to defend, is saying, the average guy says, well, I'm in shape all year round. I'm in great shape every day of every month of every year. And I'm going, so the guy who just set the world record at the Olympics, why doesn't he run that same time every day for the last year? And you go, well, he peaked for that. He had to get in shape for that. I go, but you're different though. You can stay in shape. And so you see this overtraining, and we now know that they have a seasonal approach. And so they peak for the games, they peak. And Le Mans was the first to say, I need to win the world championships and I need to win the Tour de France. Those are what make me good. We now see the NBA doing the same thing. No one cares if you're great in the beginning of the season. So they start taking minutes away from players, knowing you have to be great in the playoffs. So you look at that and you go, why is that? And it's because the human body can't be fit every day, year round. It has to have an off season. And the off season, for example, with the Timberwolves, 19 years. So these guys would come in, and you can do it whether they won or not. Now, the good news is I can defend it because the Timberwolves haven't won a championship, but they come in preseason with mood states that couldn't be happier. And the thing we found out with Greg is when he went to be overtrained, all the drugs came into sport. One of the things we noticed was that his mitochondria didn't work the same way. So at rest, he only burned carbohydrates. We couldn't get him to burn fat. And his mood states were different. His heart rates were higher. So all the overtraining stuff is nothing more than what happens to these 35 to 50-year-old guys who are really overtrained. They haven't had a day off. They work nonstop. They have too much stress. And so the human heart or the skeletal muscle doesn't know what you're doing. It responds to the stimulus of overuse or overtraining or stress. And so I've learned that a lot of these guys just need to take a day off or have an off season. That's the first question I ask a lot of people. When's your off season? And they go, no, I got to get back on that bike. I can keep beating myself, or the treadmill, keep beating myself. And I go, maybe you should switch. Maybe I don't rest anymore. I can't. I got to get up every morning and work out. And I go, the pro athlete at age 28 says, I gotta have an off season so I can come back and peak again. So the two analogies with men, they don't seem to accept very well. And yet the pro athlete realized at 28 they have to have an off season. That's why they don't play games, the Olympic games between world championships, because they can't be fit that long. They know, much as fun it would be to play in the Olympics, they'll say, I'd rather back off because I need to be great next year and I can't be great. And we talk about this with track and field athletes. Edwin Moses was the first 400-meter hurdler who was a stud, who only way in track and field athletes got paid was they showed up after the Olympics in appearance money. But he would only race 13 times a year. I think it was 12 or 13, he said, because the next one I know that my performance goes down and I'm not going to be an embarrassment on the field. So he said, no, I've got this many chips. When I'm done with those chips, I have to build them back up to be fit again. So I guess the easiest analogy to me with sports is you see these guys from 25 to 50 years old who come in totally fatigued, and you go, when was the last off season? They haven't had one. Yet every pro athlete knows he has to have a 3-month downtime where at least they change something in their program. Otherwise they won't be fit the next year. And that's when they can recover at 25.
Yeah, I ran into it more, I guess, in Ironman training, and that was, again, in my world, everybody's got a day job because
Right,
that's the only way they can pay for their bike,
right,
um,
right, right, absolutely.
and the travel, right? But of course, you're trying to train in three sports, and it's just, there just are never enough hours in the day. You always feel
Right,
like you're at a deficit. So,
right.
the whole notion of understanding recovery is so difficult for most people to get their head around, I think, because
Yeah,
it's,
well, in the book, I put that as one of the healthier dirty dozen health habits was sleeping is recovery. And
yeah,
I still think it's like everyone's getting really trendy about sleep, saying it's so important. I'm going, it's always been important. No one's just figured it out. I mean, it just, that's some of the times that you look back and you wonder how people could be so not see the big picture. But when I went to the tour with Lamont, it was very clear to me that, okay, here is this group of 150 cyclists who start a race on a day. And the next day, they all run the same, or they ride the same course. The next day, they all ride the same course. The next day, they ride the same course. So each day the course is different, but yet they're all exposed to the same stimulus. So I quickly realized it wasn't the guy who could ride that course the fastest. It's the guy who could recover from the day before, and that's what made him ride the next day faster. Because the fit guy didn't do it. It was who could recover to ride again. And so I go, well, man, this recovery piece is a lot more important than the output piece, because if you can't recover from that day to ride again the next day, what is it? And so again, you stretch that out from a 25 to 50-year-old, it's who can get up the next morning and still feel fresh and recovered. And in the triathlon world, like you say, you add 3 sports, you got to recover from all sports, which all muscle groups are involved, and going, okay, how do I juggle all 3 of these? Or how do I keep the 3 plates spinning before one of them crashes?
yeah,
So yeah, it's an interesting sport.
yeah, yeah. Well, and I think part of what's happening now is we're understanding the role of sleep, not just around physical recovery, but around mental recovery too. So that's probably raised it up, where we've had decades of thinking, well, I'm gonna steal something from the clock if because I'm gonna get up at 4 o'clock every day and get a jump on everybody, and that starts to accumulate over time, right?
Yeah, and that's why then you'll see every pro athlete say time or age is the only thing they can't defeat. And it's because they can't recover like they did. And, I guess it's, in some ways you asked about the human brain piece of it. I always ask myself, I should have learned to learn a second language when I was in grade school or high school, because now I'm going, okay, how come I can't learn a second language right now? And you're going, well, because when you're going through puberty, your brain would have just sucked up that second language and third language quicker than on this side. So everything seems to recover and you want to have as much going up as you can, because biology of puberty and aging are opposing, but they're still part of the human experience of being born, aging, and dying. And so I think what you and I agree on is this slope of going downhill, with what we used to say over 40 going downhill. The question you have to ask yourself is not how will you go over the hill. We're all going to go over the hill. That's just biology 101. But how fast you go down the hill and how long you want to lay on the bottom of the hill before you're dead is really the question you ask. And that to me should scare everybody over 50, that no, you're going to lay on the bottom of the hill for a long time, because we can keep people alive. And that's why you and I think you're the one that triggered me to thinking of health span compared to lifespan in such a different way for people, that maybe that would trigger them more, that just because you're alive doesn't mean you're healthy.
Yeah, and so maybe that's a good place just to jump in. There is the role of medicine, in terms of what's the role of medicine and what's our responsibility, and what's kind of how we're seeing that starting to play out now around kind of being alive versus having a lifestyle.
Yeah, well, and that's why I say in the book, that the baby boomer was gifted longevity. I mean, we were gifted a longer life because we came after insulin. So there are a lot of drugs that literally were life-saving drugs that you have to be so grateful for, that you weren't a type 1 diabetic before someone created insulin. They had ugly deaths. So you go, this is a great drug. Conversely, you look at statin drugs and you're going, isn't that just so we can keep eating like crap and not have high cholesterol? You go, yeah. And you go, well, now that one I like. I go, no, you like it because you don't have to change your behavior. The medication allows you to continue the bad behavior. So, but penicillin, with both my father dying and my wife's father dying, one of the things at the end of life of these do not resuscitate or the DNR stuff is that, would you put them on antibiotics if they had pneumonia? And they have recurring pneumonias, and you're going, before antibiotics, in the 1900s and even the 1800s, the late 1800s, physicians referred to pneumonia as the old man's best friend because it was the quickest way to die without having a lot of pain. But then antibiotics came in and said, well, give him this, and now we'll just keep him alive, and he'll have it again, and we'll keep him alive. And as long as he's laying in that bed paying somebody money for assisted living, we'll just keep giving him penicillin because that allows me to keep generating money off of this dying body that we just keep. So that's where it will be very tough, and that's why I think I agree with you. Your moral and but asking the same question is, why is it that we have such a hard time admitting the fact that we're just keeping people alive who chose not? That's a very ugly question that can have a lot of repercussions, but it will force a lot of people to look at themselves. What habits can you change so someone doesn't have to make that decision for you?
Yeah, I think for a lot of people, it's the outcome of living a life of convenience, right? We kind of define success by all the conveniences that were around us.
Right.
And unfortunately, the convenience that might surround us for the last 10 or 15 years of our life won't be the ones we will have asked for earlier.
Right. Well, that's exactly correct. I mean,
yeah.
We played kick the can. I think we talked about this earlier. As a kid, playing kick the can was a game that we all played as boomers. We played tag. And the only reason we played it wasn't fun to play kick the can. I mean, you talk to your grandkid and said, okay, here's what you're going to do. We're going to go put a can out in the back, a can of green beans, and we're going to put it in the lawn. I want you to just go kick it around. They're going to get you go, what do you do then? I go, well, you just keep kicking it. For how long? Well, we kicked it until before the sun went down. We kicked for 3 hours. You go, you kicked the can around? What was the fun? And you go, see, here's the problem. That was the most fun we could have. We didn't have anything else convenient. So I think when you look back, I asked myself, would I have migrated to that sofa? Hey Siri, turn on the John Wayne movies, and I would have. So I struggle with that. Don't ever say hi Siri with the phone around. So I think you're right. The convenience, but you never thought food would be so convenient, right?
No, of course not. No, no.
Hey, you can call and have pizza delivered to your house. I mean, so if you go back again, food became too abundant and too easy to get, and we'd have to walk very far to get it if you want to go back to 1,000 years ago. But now we don't have to be anything more than to be alive. You have to have a heart rate and a bowel movement, and you're alive. That's it. The quality of life after that you determine, but we can be very convenient in that. And some people, that's a bar. I think, unfortunately, that's a very low bar. And at some point, when you can no longer bathe yourself, you're going to end up in assisted living, and someone's going to pay for you.
Yeah, I think the real risk around that is that we're seeing early onset of age-related diseases happening younger, right. Which means, unfortunately, that they're going to have more years in that state than they realize, because right. Most of us look to our own family experiences and assume, well, I'm going to have something like whoever I'm choosing right. to model it after. Right. In reality, we're already seeing morbidity rates are trending longer and longer, and it really shouldn't surprise us, right? Because right. If we didn't, we just haven't been as active in our lifestyles generally. Our food right. supplies, from a quality standpoint, have gone down. It's pretty easy to predict what the outcomes are going to be if medicine's right. keeping us from dying. So. Right.
Well, and if you think about it, when I first started with the diabetics, it literally was called adult onset diabetes, as it took you till you were 50 years old to have enough obesity to drive your sugars or your insulin response to be bad, or to be what you might call out of sync or slowed down. But when you start saying, okay, this kid is a 12-year-old adult onset diabetic, you're going, well, how can he be an adult? He's 12. And you go, well, and so I think what's interesting about that, Scott, is that we were okay with the term, I'm a gestational diabetic, because I'm a female, I'm 25 years old, I'm not a type 1 diabetic, but I'm pregnant, so I'm a gestational diabetic because I'm going through gestation. But they didn't say, okay, you're always going to be a diabetic for the rest of your life because you had a baby. Once you were through your gestational period, you came back, and we go, okay, But now I struggle with these 12 to 15-year-old adult onset diabetics because of their obesity. And if you think that when you amputate toes and ankles and feet or whatever off of the 70-year-old adult onset diabetic who started at obesity at 50, I don't know how that looks very good for the 15-year-old kid thinking he's going to be able to, be a 35-year-old kid and have his limbs. And that's just because of the sedentary lifestyle and the access to foods that increases obesity. So, you can jump on and say, well, it's because it became sedentary or the convenience of high fructose foods or whatever, but that's still the lifestyle that we have. And that's where the diabetes people, I think, have the biggest hill to climb, because they don't die, they just have a decaying disease, and it's a very costly one. But that's the best image. Is why was it called adult onset, and now it's called type 2, because we no longer can call a kid an adult.
Right.
And it shows you in our lifetime, one particular combination of activity and food, we have to change the diagnosis word, because the 20 or the 15-year-old can't be called an adult.
Yeah, absolutely. So talk to me a little bit about exercise. Obviously, you have spent a lot of time in gyms, I assume.
Oh, goodness.
And so I'm sure we have people, who are going to have athletic backgrounds, but I guess those maybe who have been busy doing their careers and went to the gym or something. But if you kind of step back and say, what do you recommend as a sustainable approach to kind of maintaining exercise through your 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s? What do you see that actually works versus
well, I think I would change the mindset, because I think we've marketed the word exercise poorly, because it created an image and it sold stuff, sold clothes, it sold shoes, it sold heart rate monitors, it sold a lot of stuff. So I think the question you have to ask yourself when you're over 45 is, what will you miss when you can't do it anymore? And almost all those things are involved some type of movement. So your goal of maintaining some kind of a structured physical activity program is because you know you're going to miss something if you don't do it. So the reason to do it is because you want to remain able to go hiking, or you remain able to square dance, or remain able to play with your grandchildren. The idea that we exercise to get in shape is something that a 25 to 35-year-old is still going to like, because it is a cosmetic driven image to them. So when someone says, I don't want to do this anymore, I go, you're going to miss playing with your kids. And that's why I go back to that movie, Build It and They Will Come, the Field of Dreams movie. Those people simply missed playing baseball. That's why they kept showing back up to that thing. They didn't come back because they missed the Stairmaster. They didn't come back because they missed an activity. That's what made that movie of playing baseball, because they did it as a kid. So the first thing I would tell someone is to really sit down and ask, what will you miss? And most of us say, I miss going for walks with my wife, or I'll miss walking out. They'll miss some physical movement. So the reason that they're doing some physical activity is because there's a benefit that they identify as something they don't want to give up. Then you have to ask yourself, how will you maintain a legitimate program that does that? And spending 45 minutes or 50 minutes or an hour doing a spinning class may not have any training effect for you being able to walk up and down a hill with your grandkid, and so you have to ask, what is it that you're going to miss? But I think if you're over 40, you have to do some kind of functional strength training where there's lifting and lowering above your head. So you got to keep your range of motion. You have to be able to, touch your toes. I see it now with people saying, I can't get my shirt on anymore, but I'm still doing my hour of spinning class. And I go, well, that seems kind of odd. You can't get above your head. You can't get on the airplane, put your luggage above your head, but you're great on that spinning bike. And I go, does that bother you that you haven't figured out the link between the two? So that's why I say, find out what you want to do. If it's hiking, if it's pheasant hunting, if it's whatever it is, find the muscles that are involved, train those like it's a sport, and then you'll get the reward of being able to remain active that way. But I think going in and just hopping on a piece of equipment you burn calories, but I'm not convinced that it ties back to your activity. It's kind of like saying, why did you practice swimming as a triathlete? Well, because I had to swim. You know, you didn't say, well, I don't practice swimming, but I'm going to be a triathlete. You're going, well, maybe you ought to swim because it's part of what you like to do, right? And that's why you did it. I mean, you didn't do it out of just saying, oh, I'm going to, you know, tie it and hope that there's a connection.
Well, it's odd that you say that, because there's the social piece, and you say swimming and triathlon with 2,200 other sharks around you or piranha. That's a little too social, but that's
yeah.
a bit. But social is a big part of this, right? And
Huge.
what you can sustain.
Yeah, and you know, I still find the study that was done on, because people always ask you, you know, it's like you become like this mecca of knowledge, and I'm going, really, I'm not that smart. But people say, what's the best exercise? And I look at them like going, come on, seriously, what's the best one? And so there was actually a study that looked at walking, yoga, and square dancing in the same dosage. So in my world, again, I'm a nerd, so force times distance is work. The response to work is the training effect, how they respond. And so they pre-posted people with the same dosage of walking, the same dosage of what would be perceived as yoga and square dancing. And they had mental cognitive ability, so the ability to move and judge, and also to be the alertness. And square dancing won by far. It wasn't even close. And I go, so what's the best exercise? That shows you right there. Go find someone you can square dance with. The social piece, the fun piece, the cognitive of having to not step on your partner, of having not run into someone else. And I go, no. I just bought these $150 pair of running shoes. And I go, I should have bought square dancing shoes, because so when you get older, find something that you have fun doing, and that is part of what you want to redo the longer you can. That ties to your quality of life. But I'm amazed at people who walk in with a gym membership and, you know, get on a leg press and go, you know, maybe if you lost 50 pounds, you wouldn't have to worry about the leg press anymore. I mean, that's it. Sorry about this. Sorry, my wife is going to hate me for saying this, but her father had a lot of problems getting up and down, and as he got older. And so in our house, we had a lot of stuff, just because a lot of people, I work with a lot of equipment manufacturers, et cetera, for 40 years now. And so my wife was doing this leg press, and she couldn't do her weight. And so she put it to a weight that she could. And I said, see, that's your father. If you put his weight on the leg press, he can't do it. But if you put it 20 pounds less, he could do it. And it was a way of me saying, if your father lost 20 pounds, his mobility would be phenomenal. And she goes, well, I can't pick up that way. Like, I'm not strong enough. I go, okay, well, we're going to make you strong enough we can, or we can just take the pin and drop it 20 pounds less. And it was like this light went on, and I'm going, why is it that people complain about mobility, and yet on the weight stack, they just choose a lighter weight? And I go, that's what you should do. But it shouldn't be that complicated. I think they're hoping for some knowledge, but maybe they just don't want to back off the food, or they don't want to admit the fact that they should probably lose weight, or they don't want to admit the fact that, but ask yourself, what will you miss? And drive it by that. And you will never be unmotivated, because it's a passion for you.
Yeah, I guess, yeah, there's the fear driver if you don't, and then there's the carrot, right? The carrot and stick approach.
I still haven't figured out which is the right one.
Yeah, well, and it probably depends on, it depends on the day for me. I know I found when I was doing endurance stuff, fear was a tremendous motivator. Like, even I can remember as clear as anything, because it just etched in my mind. You're sitting there at the start of an Ironman on the beach waiting, and you say, how am I going to do this? This just does not make sense. But I know I've done it before, and in theory, I've done all the training, but I just can't imagine still doing it. And so fear can work, provided it's in some healthy context, I guess. Right.
Well, the interesting you say that made me go off on a tangent, but you know what you said, it's always interesting when people say that before an event like that. I've had everybody I know, whether I've been fortunate to have been around a lot of musicians. That's another kind of tangent in my brain I find fascinating. But they still get nervous. These are very high level, very big name people who, before they go on stage, are still nervous until they play the first song. I mean, you watch the great athletes before they go on, you know, there's one guy actually who's going to write a book about the NBA players what they do before they go and play. And yet they played for 20 years and they still have to have this ritual because they still get nervous. I go, what are you nervous about? You're going to be in the Hall of Fame and you still go through these rituals. So, you know, the thing for you is it's sort of the anticipation and that you go through. But at the end of the day, you like doing that. Now, if you said, like I think we talked about, if you were doing it with someone, the joy would be that you did it together and you could laugh about, you know, here's what we're going to start. Why are we doing this? Well, because you wanted me to, or I didn't want to. You said I was going to. But I still think, yeah, I think daily training is one piece, but you just keep looking at why you're doing it, and the joy is what you'll find why.
Yeah, and I guess the other, which you kind of touched on earlier, maybe just circle back to it, is well, partly again in context. I know you work mostly with men, and so as men, my observation is they have all the time in the world to focus on what the market's been doing, you know, in the last hour, in the last week.
Right.
But if I look at what's, you know, what I try to lecture, and it's a lecture, not education, to my classes, particularly to the men, is return on investment.
Right.
The market's going to do all sorts of things, and it's going to have, the older you get, the less it's going to have an impact on your financial and health outcomes. And so if you look at the investment in health, there's probably no better investment that you're going to make. And it's the same mentality of, you know, when we got our first job and started making monthly deposits in that savings or investment account. Like if we don't make them in a health on a routine basis and think suddenly, you know, we're just going to be, we may be gifted longevity. That doesn't mean we're gifted health or health span, right? And that's the part of, like, I don't know whether we just haven't had a generation to witness it yet, and maybe that's what we're going to see come behind us.
Well, I think, you know, what I look at that was smoking, for example. It took watching a generation die ugly of smoking before you go, oh, they weren't kidding, that can kill you. And those are ugly deaths. So what I find, people who have read my book, when people call and comment on it, are people who have put their father in a nursing home. And they go, oh, they're not kidding. I can end up here. And it can be 5 years of $8,000 a month or $10,000 a month. And you're going, that's more than I've ever had a house payment. And it's a, you know, it's a room with a bed. And you're going, that just seems like not the thing I want to do. So I think until you see that as a generation, which again, I challenge the baby boom generation. The legacy of the baby boomer generation will be, why didn't we take better care of our health except for just tell, here's how you should do this to your children, and then expect your children to pay for you to sit in a nursing home for the last 10 years of your life and saying, well, I'm supposed to get paid now. And I think it'll either be driven by fear, like you said, the carrot or the fear, but I think everybody over 50 really should go into the nursing homes of America and say, how would you like to get up every day and spend the last 5 years on that? And it's really, again, they're not evil by putting you in a nursing home. The questions for nursing homes are tied onto the basic question of, are you able or are you unable? Are you able to bathe yourself? Are you able to get up off the floor? Are you able to do it? So if you're unable, it doesn't matter how able you used to be 20 years ago. It's, you know, it's saying, well, you know, when I was 25, I won my age group. And in this run, they go, well, you're currently 65 and you can't get dressed, you can't shower, and if you get on the floor, you can't stand up. And your children go, we have to put you in assisted living. You go, no, but I was really a fit athlete 40 years ago. It doesn't matter. It's the question is, are you able or are you unable? And, you know, if you have any surgery, they won't let you go home. Just out of, a doc can't say, we're going to put you back in that environment where you're at risk of falling again. So you don't get to choose, oh, I'll just never go there. No, you will be put there. And someone will put you there, even though it's like we've had this conversation, I think, before. It's that at some point, both you and I, Scott, someone's going to say, let's take Dad's car keys away from him. And you're going to go, no, I'm always going to be able to drive. And you're going to go, you may think you are, But just like you took it away from someone else, you're going, no, you can't drive anymore. You're going to kill somebody. And you go, no, you don't understand. I drive really well. That's the same wake up call that we're all going to have. And that's just the downside of aging. So if you don't think you're going to have that happen to you, you will end up in a nursing home. And unfortunately, it won't be pretty, which I guess is the wake up call, I would hope.
Yeah, well, and there are those signs, right? As you're talking about it, I can think of both father and father-in-law who we inherited cars from different family members, and both came with several scuffs on them that happened at various, parking lots. And one was actually on a guardrail on a freeway. Just happened to touch it, but these are some of the early signs that as kids we don't necessarily have a sight to, because it's natural, right? Is we're going to recognize where the threat's going to come if we're that person driving, and we know we probably shouldn't. So to expect mom or dad to say, I'm not sure if I should be driving, it's unlikely to come there.
Yeah, and I think the other thing that, what I found about that square dancing study, I think was interesting to me, was what most people don't understand about proprioceptors, or your ability to move in 3 dimensions, is that a lot of people believe they can drive because they're going in one direction down the road and there's no cross traffic that's going to cross over them. And the people they're driving with are going the same speed in the same direction. So it's easy to do that. What's difficult is to merge onto traffic or go through roundabouts and have other traffic coming at you. Then you're going, oh, I haven't done this for a while. That part of your brain hasn't been used. And so that's where you're at risk, is that you can't do that. But it's kind of like walking on a treadmill with your hands on the side rails. It's nothing more than preparing you for a walker. I mean, you're just getting ready for, okay, I've got this down. I have my hands here. I don't worry about balance. I'm just going to walk. You go, slide off, put the walker in, and there you go. But you say, now move to your left or your right, or back up, or turn and spin, they'll fall down. You're going, well, yeah, I've been practicing walking with the walker for a long time, getting ready for the walker. And I think that piece is what I think is the biggest alarm for me with the aging brain, cognitively, proprioceptors, that piece no one has really talked about. And I think we all fear Alzheimer's and we think of short-term memory loss, but there's a lot more training effect of the brain by being sedentary than I think people ever thought. I think in the pulmonary world, we could say the same thing. We never thought of the elasticity of the lungs being such a limitation, but we will do more pulmonary rehab with elderly than we ever thought of. It's just, again, you didn't have to do it when they died at 75, but if they're 95 years old, they have to be able to exhale and inhale deeply to not get pneumonia. So we'll be pulmonary rehabbing them just like we did treadmill rehabbing. It's just a generation. We haven't seen so many old people before.
Yeah, as you talk there, I try to tell people it's pretty easy to get another 5 quality years. You don't have to work that hard.
Absolutely.
Right? That sounds fair. And 10 to me seems like a more realistic target to shoot for. Again, without really working at it, just kind of getting some of the basics and making some daily life choices around some habits that aren't solely driven by convenience. There's nothing wrong with convenience, provided it's serving one purpose and it's not your life is built. All your decisions are based on convenience, right?
Well, you may like this that I said 10 years ago, and people laughed at me because I said it off a cuff. And it's funny sometimes when you get around and you're being interviewed, things that come to your brain and you say because it's a spontaneous response. I said they ought to put warning labels on every automated device, how many calories you're going to burn, or how many years you're going to cut off your life. And they go, that's a stupid thing to say. And I go, actually, we have, on smoking, we have this thing, but your electric garage door opener should say, this will cut 2 years off of your life. And I'm going, well, that'd be morbid. No one would buy one. I go, I understand capitalism, but opening the garage door opener for the last 20 years of your life by pushing the button, if you just made the analogy that it was 5 calories a day that you lost by lifting up and down, you're at 1,500. That's 5 pounds of fat just because you push the button. And you're going, yeah, well, that's stupid. I go, no, I'm just trying to make the big picture for you. Convenience across 20 years has a sedentary minute added to it that you didn't have before, and wherever it is. So I like, trust me, when I lived in Minnesota, I'm not getting out in that snowstorm. I like pushing the button, but at some point you push a lot of buttons and you do it now from your chair. And I think where I do think obesity is still driven to help it is with food. People have really teased out how sedentary we've become, how many minutes of inactivity we have because of a sedentary convenience. So you're right. I don't think we're all going to go back and tell your kid to go play kick the can outside, but I do think we have to say, you're still, well, you'll love this. I think I talked about in the book, there was two golfers that I'd met at this wedding, and they always were giving me a hard time about they were gaining weight. And I said, for the last 20 years, we've been gaining weight. I said, when's the last time you walked the golf course? And they go, well, 20 years ago, we switched to the golf cart. And I go, and when you get to the clubhouse, do you still have the same number of beers or burgers? Well, yeah, we got done playing golf. I go, well, so you took out the walking, but you kept the food. What did I miss there? And, again, Scott, if someone said to me, I got in great shape for running and I was okay, but when I quit running, I gained weight. And I go, did you eat the same as when you were running? Well, yeah, I kept the same. I go, so was it the loss of activity it's funny how we don't look at both our calories in and our calories out. And now the big hot button is obviously the idea of fat burning and mitochondria. But like I said, with Lamont, we did that in the 90s. It's really an obese, overtrained person's mitochondria is different than when they were healthy. So you can't treat you're treating a secondary side effect as opposed to treating the original thing. Put them back to being healthy and relaxed, and they'll go back to burning fats at rest as opposed to carbohydrates. But and that's a new thing, but it's just because we're so many obese people now, we think we have to treat that as opposed to saying, why don't we go back and treat the original cause?
Yeah, without jumping into the diet nest, I've had the same observation, like, oh, we're going to teach you to burn fat. That's really important. Say, well, that's not news at all. We've been doing that for decades. We understood that a long time ago. Otherwise, nobody ran the marathon without stopping to have a couple of burgers along the way. Right. That's
exactly.
Yeah. So
the nutrition piece, though, you have to realize it's $1 billion business for a reason. And I brought that up even with in the book on alcohol and caffeine consumption. I think you have to ask yourself why you choose both of them. And I always think it's interesting. People say, well, I love the taste. And I go, I don't remember anybody I know going through college who loved that first throw up session they had from drinking. I don't think that was like a big thing. Boy, that really tasted well. That's, but even with coffee, you may say you learn to like it, but you go to and we'll pick on Starbucks just because it's the biggest brand name, but you go into Starbucks and you ask them of the blend they have, and they'll say, well, this is our favorite blend. And you go, great. And they'll say, well, you want cream and sugar and foam on that? And I go, well, if it's your favorite blend, can I just, they go, well, no, it's not. You got to add this stuff to it. And I go, well, why do you add it? So the reality is you do it because both are drugs and both have an effect. So, but we've adopted caffeine consumption because we've had these stores, but yet it's the other calories that go in to hide the bad taste that we didn't like, that we're supposed to like, that we've never added. We never thought that those calories counted. But you're right. Let's stay off of the nutrition world, or we'll talk too long.
Well, I think the one point which I try to raise up with people is understanding addiction, right? That humans are far more addictive beings than we'd like to think. We'd like to point to the smoker. We'd like to point to the alcoholic. Not me. I'm not an addict. Well, we're all addicted to all sorts of things. And we don't realize all the food additives that are in there that we're addicted to, that are mysteries to us. But I think if we've been away from exercise, we probably forget the endorphin kick. Right. That's what, when you come back to it, that for me is, I kind of went through, I peaked with weight and dipped in terms of physical performance when I was 40. And it was just like, this is not the person that I wanted to be. And one of the biggest discoveries was rediscovering the endorphin rush. And you can, like, I was on the bike this morning and I hammered it pretty good. And man, it's fun. But you got to work up to it to earn it, right?
Yeah, and that I think is interesting because I think it's one of the depressions that is common with the pro athlete when they retire. It's because they're very clear that they will never experience that level of sheer joy, rush, whatever it is. And again, the book is to men, and I've dealt with some female athletes, but the male testosterone athlete, they still find great joy in a race. They still find that piece of them, and they know that they won't have that again. And so the question, I stepped back and said, okay, if that's 25% of the population like you who weren't a pro athlete but found endorphins in physical activity, I wonder the musicians or the artists, when we age, not being a musician or a singer, for example, I know a lot of singers who find great joy when they get done, the endorphins of singing. And so I look at the 50-year-old and 60-year-old, and I say, how do we get them cognitively alive? Is to find something that they may have found joy in, but we never gave them credit for finding joy, because the depression and the mental happiness that they would say, I really like to sing, or I like playing a musical instrument. So I would tell them, find that same endorphin that you may have had in some other activity and put it back in your life. Don't sit and be bored. So it was a tangent to you, but yeah, there's not a lot of people who find that. I shouldn't say it's not common in all populations of the male species to say, I really find movement, the adrenaline rush in it. But ones who find it will tell you that it's real. But again, I think the singers will tell you, singing a song is to me just a great release for me. And so that, again, I think the mental aging brain, you have to find something where the endorphin piece is, again, what you will miss. But it really is quite a joy for you, obviously, when you get done. And do you finish it? And that was always the original studies in the 70s. Why do you exercise? They'll say, I find joy when I'm done. It was always the statement. It wasn't, I enjoy before it. I always find joy when I'm done.
Yeah, well, I know this was one of the things I think you talked about in your book, and that was, and I kind of go back to Ironman experience, just because it's so extreme in a few respects. But I always said, like, the longer the sport, the more the training time is relative to racing time. So if you're all about racing, don't go into endurance sport, because you don't have much time to race. You just, that's not how if you want to race, be a sprinter. Right. So I said, and you better love the training, because otherwise there's just not enough in it for you for the race. So that may be the one common thing, and it becomes lifestyle. So
yeah, and I think the question, I've done this before, but so you enjoy the training, which you have to, because if you look at the return on those minutes for your race improvements, you quickly realize, I just spent, so you'll love the analogy then, because I do this, and again, it was one of those talks that came to me, and I do have two brothers, but I made the statement that I had a twin brother, so that I could say that we both adapted the same way. So in other words, there's a huge genetic component to training, and there's a genetic component to athletics. These people have higher fitness levels, they respond differently, they just are. Otherwise, we'd all be world record holders. So I said I have an identical twin brother. Of course I don't, but it made sense, because I could say, so we know that we both are, one of us wasn't a 100-meter runner and one wasn't the 3,000 or the 5K runner. But we were both identical in our ability to express ourselves genetically from physiology. And I said, he called me about doing this 5K race. It was a 10K. And I said, and of course I'm going, I'm not going to run a 10K. What am I going to run a 10K for? And he said, no, I want you to run a 10K with me. And the idea of the 10K was, it's for a great charity. It was to save the dogs. And then whatever the crowd in front, and I'm sorry about this, but this is honest live for you and I having a conversation. I change it to whoever's in the crowd. If I think that they want to save the whales, I say that. If it's whatever people will go, oh, I love this story because he's helping something that I find enjoyment in. So, and I said it was for Humane Society. And everybody was going, this is great. Then I'm going to love this story about the Humane Society. And this guy's telling a story about his identical twin brother. And I'm going, first off, I don't have an identical twin. And it wasn't for the, but they bought into it. So I said, you know, as a physiologist, my brothers always hated that fact that I would got more attention from exercise. So we were going to run this thing, but it was a great cause. We spent $250. We gave them money. We got the shirt. We got 4 months out was the event. I was going to train 4 days a week for 45 minutes. So 45, 45, 45, 45, 3 hours a week is what I was going to train to run this 10K. He, of course, says, no, I'm going to spend 5 days a week for an hour a day. So he's spending 2 hours more a week. And across this 4-month period, he spends 32 hours more training than I do. And yes, we get to the 10K and we gave the money and we both got the shirt and we both started at the same time. And he beat me, blew me away by 45 minutes. And you know the difference of the 10K. If you finish at 45 minutes, you're at 90 minutes. The 90 minutes, the truck is picking up the cones behind you. They thought you, right? But the point was what you said. He spent 32 hours longer and only had a 45-minute return on those minutes. And I think that's where I think what you just said, you have to really like those 32 minutes or can justify those 32 hours, because you're not going to get it at the end with the performance. And so I caution people when they look at, do you get a return on those minutes? Now you found joy in that. I would tell you if we did it together and ran together, we'd find joy. But you have to ask yourself exactly what you said. Does the training volume justify the end result? And most times when endurance sports, what you just said is so obvious that people don't get it. You spend an awful lot of time away from somebody or not with somebody or not doing something for a small reward at the finish line. And worst case, you get the flu before the race and you don't get to do the race anyway.
Yeah.
But
well,
that's a very wise perception though.
It's, well, I'm also fortunate because my wife runs 50 miles a week. So I get to do both, and there's no shortage of opportunities to get out. And that's for us is a time away from everything. And we
but
get
again,
to talk
that's
about
a
stuff,
quality for you
yeah.
and your wife to spend time together
Yeah.
is the benefit. The training effect is one thing, but the benefit is quality time together. And I think you have to ask yourself together, sitting in the basement of a home or of a fitness center by yourself is not going to be something you're going to say, I wish I spent more time doing that the last 5 years of your life. You say, I wish I'd spent more time, or probably could learn to play a musical instrument. I probably should have done something other than waste that time. So.
Well, I had a whole band down there with me this morning. Actually, she was out running and she came home because I normally I'd have the headphones on, but I knew she was out, so I had the surround sound going. And she came down and says, "It's just like this loud all over the house."
Well, congratulations that you and your wife found something that you do together. And, I think that social piece will still go back to what you find joy. It gives you a reason. The emotional stability is still very profound. So again, I wish people looked at their exercise program or their health. What is it that you find joy? Who do you want to spend it with? Because that gives you a bigger reason than saying, I'm going to cut 5 minutes off my 10K time.
Yeah. And I think for guys, right, it's a, do you have some guy friends or whomever that you want to continue to do whatever together and find that band or your tribe of guys that want to do it? I know around here and certainly around there, if you like to cycle, for example, boy, there's a lot of cyclists over the age of 70 still kicking it and they're getting out routinely, and they're not using, well, I'm retired. I don't have a bike anymore.
Right. Well, the thing about the group, it made me, again, it's a tangent, but sorry about going off on it. But I was asked to help 4 physicians do this race across America, just because they knew I could set up an exercise program that was intense enough to match the duration of getting from Oregon to Florida. I'm going, Oregon to Florida in 7 days? Are you nuts? What's wrong with you guys? And of course, they didn't like it because they said publicly the best training effects you had wasn't your genes, it was your physicians. So you're used to working med school, puts you in sleep deprivation. So, because riding that long is a sleep deprivation study. It's not about who's fit, it's who can ride the longest without sleep. Of course, they thought I was taking a shot saying we weren't very fit, but the reality is, so these 4 physicians, they were all over 50. and they ended up raising money. We changed it. They were going to be called Team Viagra at the time, and now it was called the Race Across America. They raised money for Children's Heart, which is a big hospital, an Abbott Hospital in St. Paul, Minnesota. They raised $125,000. But the beginning programs were all me educating them, putting through exercise programs one-on-one. But eventually, when they could get outside, the 2 would gang up, the 3 would gang up, and the community of the 4 of them riding together was what I had to learn to get out of the way and let the 4 people become who they were, the team. The only reason they made it from Seattle to Florida was the 4 of them became teammates. They weren't 4 individual people who were fit. And the joy they had was when they finished the 4 of them. So like your wife or like the other people, that the social connection was what made that activity continue. It made them adhere to it. Now, what I did find interesting, I talk about it, is that the next year, what they did is they did a canoe trip. So in other words, they changed the physical training effect from cycling to rowing or to canoeing. But it was the same thing. They had a training, they had a program, they had an event, and it was a way of keeping them active, but yet changing the outcome, but still having the 4 of them enjoy training or exercising together, if I can use that word there. But that's a big piece for you, what you say with the guys when you go out with those groups.
Yeah.
It's the camaraderie.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, and you'll say this, guy, you know, when we look at the NBA guys, for example, that's what they will all state that they miss when they retire. They miss the locker room. They miss that they did it with people. So the team or the camaraderie, it wasn't that, and it's a pretty genuine thing. And I think men maintaining those friendships that you can find something that you can do together that has a benefit is something that I would encourage any man to do. Is if you're going to do something by yourself, it can get pretty lonely. Find who you want to. And if it's your son or your daughter, or like if you want to go run a 10K, take one of your children with you or your grandchildren, or do something where you have a bond that is tied to the event, but the fun is you doing it together. It's not that you're going to. So, but it is interesting that you and your wife find joy in doing that.
Yeah, well,
don't tell me her name is Joy either.
No. And she doesn't race. She detests racing.
She just does it for that.
Just does it for that. And as you're saying there, I went up to Ottawa last spring and did. My son said he wanted to try a half marathon. He'd seen me do some things, and he's in his 30s now. And someone else got him motivated and went up and did that. And when you talk about, you know, what are the things that are important, boy, that was a big point in my year last year, just to be able to take someone through, because as you know, those who've been around it, you get people on a path, and that can carry them for the rest of their life. But you just got to get on the path, and seeing him get on that path finally. Because I know for me, my 30s was, I would say that's kind of where it all went to hell. And thankfully, I got myself back on track.
Yeah, because you were tied back to occupations and things like that, so you went away from it. But you know, it's if you go back to looking at before exercise became, you know, a trend, hobbies is what is a similar analogy. So people that took their kids fishing, grandpa would take the kid fishing, and they learned how to fish because grandpa took them, and that was how they connected to the generations who looked at hiking or fishing. And in the Midwest, the pheasant hunters, for example, were all because that's what they did as families. And now the great news is it was a cause, but so the hobbies of, I learned to farm because it was my grandfather taught me how to do this. So the family connection, or the father-son connection of passing on that hobby, you find joy because someone taught you. And we forgot that about exercise. And I think if we just look and say, that's how you tie that, instill that 30-year-old who's lost, to get them back saying, hey, this might be something you like. It could be playing a musical instrument. It could be singing. It could be, in your case, physical activity. But when they're lost, find something that you can show them, mentor them, if you will. You'll find joy in the mentoring. Now, you find great joy because it was your son, but mentoring someone else would be the same way.
Right. Yeah. Any of us who've done coaching, we've experienced that in multiple opportunities, haven't we? Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. And again, it's part of your legacy, which I think the boomer has to figure out. someday we'll be defined as a generation that lived a lot longer than any other generation. And what did they do with those 20 extra years? And did they waste them or did they give them? Because it was a gift to us. We were just simply born at the right time. And the value of a gift when you give it is what the person does with it. And we will be defined by how we took care of the longevity gift we were given.
Yeah, I don't know whether we, as a generation, we still don't understand it, I guess. And so we're wondering, we're not understanding the gift, or we just assume we're going to get some gene editing in another 5 years, and yeah, we'll be good again for another 20 years.
Yeah.
I'm not sure what kind of is at play in people's minds, but.
Well, again, I think, if you go into the typical medical model that we've grown up with is you go in and say, fix me. And so I have a problem, fix me. And they fix you. But you didn't change, they just fixed you. And so we get used to saying, fix me. And you're going, I can't fix you anymore. You've done too much damage. You should have changed it. So, and I don't think people like to hear that you're responsible, for your actions. Yet I know every dad whose son takes the car out and leaves the lights on and the battery runs dead and they have to get a jump, says, you're paying for that. I'm not paying for that. You caused that. No, it's not my fault. It's not my fault. Fix me. So it's amazing what we want to fix for someone, and yet when we tell the kid learn to fix themselves, but remaining healthy is not what Americans have shown to be really good at, and especially in the last 30 years. We have to be fixed.
Yeah, one of the analogies I think that resonates with some people is if you imagine you got one car for life, right? So the tires aren't going to last, but if you proactively maintain it and you can go in and you can get tires changed, that's easy enough. Right. You can manage to get a number of things changed. Then there's the two extreme. If you just leave it sitting out in the yard and doing nothing, it's not going to last very long. And if you drive the crap out of it and take it off road, that's going to shorten its life too. So how would you kind of say, well, I want to keep that car running and I want to keep it reliable for as long as I can. If we use that same approach to our own life, I think we'd make some different choices. And it's the small choices that we tend to think aren't as important. Yeah. The problem is, like when you say the minutes, it's the minutes add up over weeks and months and years.
Right. Yeah, I use that analogy with Jim Nelson in my book. Jim Nelson was the car mechanic that fixed my car from day one. And it's funny, when I would go in, I had a 20-year-old Jeep that I was driving with 220,000 miles on it. And, he was the guy, he was my orthopedic surgeon, if you think of it, because I said, okay, I got to put new tires on. He goes, okay, you got 220,000 miles on this car and it's 20 years old. I don't think we're going to put the ones on that'll give you another 100,000 miles. And I'm going, yeah, but those are nice tires. He goes, Dan, you have 220,000 miles on this car. It's 20 years old. Maybe we'll put the ones that'll give you 50 or 80. And I'm going, no, I want this. And he goes, just think you might want to look at the other things. And so it really is what you're saying. You're trying to manage this car down the road. And what I always thought was interesting, and I made the analogy in the book, is I would see these really nice cars that I would say, now what's wrong with that one? Because I love going in and watching these mechanics, because to me, I don't know, I just thought they were cool how they could fix something. And I go, that's a pretty nice looking car over there. I go, what's wrong with it? And he goes, oh, we got to junk that one. I go, look at it, it's in beautiful shape. And he goes, no, the guy drove it with the red light on for too long, and now the engine needs replaced. And I go, yeah, but it's in great shape. And he goes, no, it's not. And the analogies to me were just flooding. I'm like, well, I got to write this down. I learned from my car mechanic a story about a great car that the red light was on and the guy ignored it. And now the engine's done. And yet it's a beautiful looking car. And so the analogy is very true with humans. I mean, you ignore chest pain for 20 years of your life and you're going, that's surprising. You just didn't go in, or high blood pressure, et cetera. So that's the male brain in me using those analogies. And again, that's again why I wrote the book to men. I think most men won't be able to comprehend that. And we talked about this before. You had I struggle with the aging male compared to the aging female, just how unique we are in the presence of how will you go on. I mean, that you mentioned your wife, and so without being emotional about it, you know, at some point, one of you will die before the other. And the question is, who will do better as time goes on? And you go, what is it that the male would want to go first or second, or, you know, and yet I see more females who outlive a long-term relationship with their husband and just simply can reinvent themselves and not nearly struggle like the male will. And that's why I find it interesting that that part of the male brain is unique. And it's not that he's an alpha male. It's just he doesn't have a purpose anymore. And you go, well, you have to reinvent yourself at age 50 or 60 because there's a lot of things that will change. But you're going to live a lot longer than you thought.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's it. You know, the reinventing yourself can be a little daunting.
Right.
Yeah, it starts, I think, initially for people just to say, well, just get out and try a bunch of stuff.
Right.
Keep the expectations low. Don't worry if you're going to, you know, change the world or not. If you happen to fall into something, that's going to be pretty easy. But to just kind of assume that, you know, it all happened in your career. I probably same as you. Like I have friends who are doctors. You know, have probably saved thousands of people's lives, but that isn't really necessarily what they would view as their legacy in later years. It's probably some other things that, and that can be a hard one to top, right? You talk about pro athletes. If you've been a heart surgeon, like you're not going to see that many people every day when you get up after you retire. So what are you going to do?
Yeah, there was a great surgeon that read the book and commented exactly what you said. And he was mentioning that he misses the joy of saving people or helping people. I mean, that has to be a very fulfilling, you know, that this person was dead, now they're alive. But he said it kind of interesting, but again, it's a perspective that you don't get until you're old enough to have that perspective. He said, when I was a young surgeon, I would go to bed at night feeling how happy I was for the day I had, the day that now it's 10 o'clock at night that I had at 12 o'clock, 2 o'clock, 4 o'clock in the afternoon, the surgeries I've done. But he said, I realized when I retired, I had to go to bed with the same excitement about what I'm going to do tomorrow. Find what joy am I going to find tomorrow, as opposed to what was the joy I found in the day before. And he said that was the tipping point for him, was I have to be able to look ahead to tomorrow with the same joy as the joy I found. And that's the aging. And you know, I use the other analogy with aging, and I think you know Chip Conley has got this thing on Modern Elder Academy, which is an interesting thing about the aging process. But you know, let's say that you were a golfer, and the greatest joy in your life would be to play Pebble Beach. And it wouldn't matter if you were a 30-year-old golfer or a 50-year-old golfer or a 60-year-old golfer or whatever. So forget the age. It's just that this was the mecca, was to play this 18 holes of golf and the premier golf club. For you, it would be to do the Hawaiian triathlon, or it would be I could just do it once, right? But in the golf course, it's a little different because it's easier for people to understand that when you're on number 3 or number 4 or number 5, you're still looking forward to such joy that the scenery, and you're going to get to 9 and you're going to be able to have a sandwich afterward, and you're going to play 10 and looking forward. But when you're teeing off on 16, you're going, I got 2 left. Then I'm done. And what am I going to do then? And all of a sudden you're going, hey, I didn't have this perspective when I was teeing off on 3 that I have when I'm teeing off on 16. And I think that's the perspective that you get when you're 50. But if you haven't, when you're 60, you realize I'm playing the back 9, and I have to find some joy in my life, or it will just, I will miss out on the greatest joy I had, was to play this golf course. So for you, finding it with your wife being physically active is phenomenal. And that's the challenge, I think, that the boomer has to figure out, is what is it that will give you joy as you play the back 9 holes of your life. Right.
And nothing wrong with the back 9, right? You may have had a fabulous front 9. You may have had an average front 9. Like if you're whichever way it's gone, well, you've made the turn. Now it's a new opportunity to either do better or to hang on
Yeah.
there's no point throwing a good round away.
Right. And the other thing about that,
play.
Scott, yeah, is that the people who have bought my book who are children of boomers. So these are the 40-year-old sons of the 70-year-old who will say, I bought it as a gift for my 70-year-old grumpy old man father because he has to change because he's no fun to be around when he's grumpy. And they're going, so no one wants that. So that they're going, if you want my grandkids I want them to have joy being around you. You have to realize that you're not as much fun to be around when you're a grumpy old man at 70 than you were when you were 40. And so your son had to have a whole new perspective of you running alongside you saying, hey, Dad's pretty cool. But if he said, Dad, I want you to get up and go for a run with me, and you were crabby sitting on the sofa, he'd go, I don't know about that. I guess we'll go over there for Father's Day, but we're not coming back again until next Father's Day. And that again should wake up almost every male, is that as much as you didn't like hanging out with grumpy old men, you will become one really quickly. And you're limiting your social engagement by people who love you because they're going to go, sorry, but this isn't fun anymore. And I made the analogy between, we don't do that with Mother's Day. Everybody loves to go home for Mom on Mother's Day. But Father's Day is a little different. And it's still, again, it's a gene difference between the two scenarios. Should be both celebrated the same. Going home for Mother's Day, going home for Father's Day. But people love going home for Mother's Day. But grumpy dad can make Father's Day, get him a tie, and we're out of there. It's funny how it works, but that's reality.
Yeah, again, different lifestyles in terms of different approach to life, but typically between men and women. So, as I look at what really strikes me again is like your book is truly unique in my mind.
Well, thank you.
It sounds like you've been getting some really interesting feedback. So as you kind of step back a little bit and where you had this idea, I'm sure in your mind you started writing it perhaps many years ago. But as you look back after it's been out, you went through the writing process and kind of what's going to be in and what's not going to be in, what's too personal or not. So what are your reflections now after having done it and kind of getting some feedback and your own thoughts?
Interesting question. It is, I guess it's interesting only in that, and having buried my father and my wife's father, watching how people talk about their legacy is a piece that's interesting to me, in that I think some people will say, I don't want to remember, and forget the situations because we won't be that personal, but they both obviously died. But one will say, that wasn't my father for the last 3 years of his life. So one will say, I miss him. The other will say, I don't miss him as much because the last 3 years, that wasn't him. They missed 10 years back, but they didn't miss that. And I guess it's these long drawn out. And so it really gets down to, what do you want your legacy to be? And you have the ability to change that. And that's why I called those, again, it was one of these analogies that came to me. I call them a healthy dirty dozen. Because the movie The Dirty Dozen, Lee Marvin says to these people, okay, here are your 12 people. You're all going to be sentenced to death, or you're going to prison, or you're going to die. We're going to do this mission. And the reality is, you're probably going to die in the mission, but your legacy will change. And I guess I'm surprised or encouraged or humbled by the people who have said it made them rethink what their legacy will be as they live out longer than they thought they would. And so I find it interesting that it's struck a chord with people as they age, is I really have to take care of my health better, because that's how people will remember me. The last 5 years, the last 10 years, they'll go, well, he was a great guy when he was, a practicing surgeon, or he was a great guy when he was a practicing athlete, or he was a great guy, but man, those last 15 years, he was not a pleasant man to be around. And you're going, really? And I think people I don't know if that answers your question, but I never really looked at it that way. I didn't think it would be that personal for men to come back and say that was what I got from it, which I guess is flattering, but I certainly didn't mean it that way.
Well, so I would say, as I went through this, as developing courses and things and working with classes, that was exactly what evolved out of that. Was it's not simply about longevity, it's tied so intimately to legacy. What's the point of having longevity if you have no
Right.
legacy, right? If it's part of what goes with the gift of a long life is the opportunity to do
Right.
something of some significance that kind of says, I was worthwhile. And the flip side of that is, again, I'll kind of throw the fear thing out there, is looking back on a life, lived long that didn't end particularly well in terms of on self-esteem. Yet by the time you realize it, it's been a long, slow erosion of that self-identity versus if it's a continual build, which it certainly can be in the last 30 of your life. It's a great opportunity that I think a lot of people they don't think of it consciously, perhaps. So that's, and I think that's what happens is, what I really love about your book is it is so direct, right? We dance around this whole aging thing. We don't want to offend anybody about getting old. It's only because we don't like the connotations associated with what we've seen as the ugly side of old. Flip around and say, well, who are some role models who have been some fabulous role models of being old, and say, I'd sign up for that in a heartbeat.
Well, I think that the ones that I think, as far as the human brain goes, and this is why, again, people say, well, is it a book just about exercising? And I go, no, I'm not going to give you exercises that's going to change your legacy. I'll change a lifestyle or an activity or a position that will change you. But the more you're around men who fathers have gone through Alzheimer's, or people who have gone through Alzheimer's, that's a tragic experience for those people to go see this man who doesn't know them. And a friend of mine who I acknowledge in the book would say, he would drive in to the Alzheimer's ward, and again, on the flip side of that is, we're going to spend an awful lot of money on that population. Yet it's easy to rally around how tragic a legacy is for a person to live 10 years of their life and not know who their children or their spouses, where they are, what day it is. We all go, oh, what a tragic, and it is, make no mistake, it is. But yet, if you stay and say, well, that one's a legacy, but sitting here being grumpy isn't, I don't know where you draw the line to say, aren't you the same? That person has no brain function. You do, you just chose not to. So who is the one that, but again, I don't know why the title came up, but I think as a kid, watching those old Westerns or the Tarzan where the lion just dropped over dead, and we never saw the lion go into the jungle when the new lion came in, and you're going, what about the old lion? How long is he gonna live? He's gonna live a long time, and it's not gonna be pretty. And I think that's the point, is that we're not going to die young. Once you make 65, one of us is going to make 85. And you're going to go, 85 and you can't bathe? 85 and you can't put your clothes on? 85 and you're going, oh, that's not going to be a fun, year? No, it could be another 5, could be another 10. So I don't think we've seen enough of it, but as a generation, what I hope is you can change the philosophy or the personality or the perception of aging, where it's not to be feared. It's another 20 years or another chapter of your life that you can do something, as opposed to just sit around and wait for someone to wait for you to die. And I find that when people comment, like you said, it's your legacy that you're fighting for now. It's not whether or not you were, what you did when you were 45. And that's what the athletes found. Lamont is a dear friend, and after he won the tour, he's got to figure out what he's going to do now. And all those athletes got to figure out, okay, that's what I did before. But do I still want to say, oh, 50 years ago, I won the Tour de France, or, 30 years ago, I was a surgeon. that was great when you dropped over dead at 72, because you could say, well, 3 years ago it was this. But in the obituary, it's going to say, well, 20 years ago he did this. He hasn't done nothing for 20 years. And you still have the ability to do something. So I guess if you ask me, what did I learn? I think more people have commented on it was important to them to look at their legacy more than they thought it was.
Oh, I think that's a beautiful place to finish it, because I really think that is the pinnacle, and that's the thing. That's the intangible that everyone can really own, is what their is their own legacy that's going to be different from anyone else's, and you just help give them the tools and the motivation to get there. So
well, thank you again.
I think it's great.
I'm glad I reached out to you on LinkedIn. I'm not giving a shout out to LinkedIn, but hey, I think there's enough goofies on it. But you can tell when someone makes a comment, and your comments to me, I read the first part of the sentence and I go, here's how I'd answer that. And I'm reading the thing going, hey, I think he asked me the question. So I find I'm flattered that you have started what you've done, that you're compassionate and you're passionate about what you do. I wrote a book, but you've been doing this as long, and there's another people who have done aging stuff. You have to look at, either you're a boomer that decided to change something or you didn't. And so congratulations for you for what you've done. And I'm just a guy that you interviewed. So, but I applaud what you've done in the past, because obviously you called me to interview because you've already created this. I'm just a guy from Minnesota that wrote a book, now living in Arizona.
Yeah, well, it's, this ultimately will probably be my legacy, and that's and I didn't discover it until I was well on in my career. So I'm truly grateful to have the opportunity to talk to just a really, really amazing people like you. So I'm the big benefactor here. And if we can share some information in the process, then it's a big win. Okay, so your book, You're Too Old to Die Young, your website. I've got it up here.
Redoing it as we speak. I'm redoing it just because I knew guys like you would make me have to make it more trendy and woke, or whatever the words of today's youth are. I have to have it more, but it will be danielzeman.com. Okay. And it should be up probably within the next. And you'll love this story because danzeman.com was taken, and I've always been called Dan Zeman since even the docs all call me Dan. The athletes call me Danny Z, and it's you always get a nickname. But Daniel Zeman, for some reason, wasn't taken. And it triggered in my mind, the only person that ever called me Daniel Zeman was my mother when she yelled at me. So I said, at least I know when someone goes, that if it says Daniel, I can't lie on that website about honesty and truth or what legitimate data is. Dan Zeman, I could be more jovial about it. But Daniel Zeman means if I put it up there, I know that my mother said, that's a lie, and you know it, and you shouldn't have put it up, you're just trying to sell something. So danielzeman.com, but you call me Dan.
Awesome. Well, it has been great, Dan. Great to talk to you again, and thanks for doing this, and best of luck with it. And I'm not going to call you if I want to break a 4-hour marathon, I promise.
Thank you. Hey, enjoy. Take care.
Take care. Okay, bye-bye.